Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's case is called the $6 Million Mummy. For those of us raised after 1970, the decade seemed to be such an unusual time. You had bell-bottom pants, the rise of disco, the Watergate scandal, and the Vietnam War. Television continued growing and pushing farther into the public mindset, serving as both a frontline reporter for many issues of the day, but also as an escape from reality. In one particular instance, these two opposite ends of the spectrum seemed to converge. The $6 Million Man, who was played by Lee Majors, ran from 1973 to 1978 and featured storylines that revolved around Colonel Steve Austin, a United States astronaut who is rebuilt by science after a failed NASA test flight, giving him bionic abilities and turning him into the $6 Million Man. In 1976, Majors and the show's crew were filming at Laugh in the Dark, a haunted house attraction in Long Beach, California, at the Pike Amusement Park, 2 weeks before Christmas. They were in the process of filming a fourth season episode known as Carnival of Spies, when one of the crew tried to reposition a hanged man dummy that was one of the scares in the funhouse. Spray painted with glow-in-the-dark paint, the hanged man had hung in the corner for 4 years, swinging back and forth as children and young adults passed by. When the stagehand moved it that day, he heard a snap and realized he had broken off one of the dummy's arms. As he tried to glue the arm back into place, he came to a shocking realization. There was dry bone sticking out of the center. Other crew members came to view the arm and realized they were looking at actual bone and muscle tissue. What they thought was a funhouse dummy was actually the remains of a man. Emergency services were called in, and paramedics took what was essentially a mummy over to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. Of course, there was the question of who this man was and when he died, but the coroner would make another crazy discovery. The coroner found a .32-20 bullet with a turn-of-the-century metal jacket that had caused his death. At the start of the 1900s, the lead core of a bullet was encased within a thin layer of exterior, harder metal. This was known as jacketing. However, their biggest clue would be found in the mummy's mouth. When it was opened, tickets to the Museum of Crime, along with a penny from 1924, were found. When the owner of the museum, a man named Dan Sawney, was located, they were told that he knew exactly what mummy they were talking about, and the man's name was Elmer J. McCurdy. Elmer was born on January 1st, 1880, to 17-year-old Augusta Sadie McCurdy and what historians think was one of her older male cousins. Because Sadie was unmarried, Elmer was adopted by his Uncle George and Aunt Helen. He lived with the couple until Uncle George died from tuberculosis in 1890. Helen and Sadie then made the decision to move from Washington, Maine to Bangor, Maine, which was just over an hour away. In his teenage years, Elmer was unruly and drank alcohol heavily, a habit that would turn into alcoholism as an adult. He eventually returned to Washington to live with his grandfather, where he became an apprentice plumber. Life was good for the men until Elmer lost his job in 1889. Soon after, both his mother and grandfather died. After a short stint as a lead miner, he drifted through the United States, heading west. No matter what state he worked in, Elmer always seemed to lose his job due to his alcoholism. Finally, in 1907, he joined the Army, where he learned about weapons and explosives. After 3 years in the Army, he was honorably discharged and decided not to let his training go to waste. Elmer decided to use his new skills to rob banks and trains. In 1911, he and his gang robbed a Pacific Express train that Elmer heard had a safe with a large amount of cash. Once the train was stopped, too much nitroglycerin was applied to the safe, causing it to blow apart, almost destroying it. They were only able to get away with a small amount of silver coins that they pried from the half-melted safe. Later that year, and with a new partner, Elmer broke into a bank in Chautauqua, Kansas, and attempted to rob their safe. Once he had blown off the outer door to the safe, he found that he was unable to open the inner door. As he struggled, he and his partner were forced to leave before law enforcement showed up. Evidently, the blast woke up most of the town, alerting them to the robbery. Over the next couple of weeks, McCurdy traveled to a spot near Bartlesville, Oklahoma, where he stayed in his friend's hayloft and drank. That was until he heard about the Katy train, a railroad that linked Missouri, Kansas, and Texas. There was a particular Katy train that would be carrying a large amount of money that was to be used as payment for the Osage Native tribe. On October 4th, 1911, near Okessa, Oklahoma, McCurdy and his new gang stopped the car they thought carried the cash and uncoupled it from the rest of the train. Unfortunately, they uncoupled the passenger car by mistake and were forced to rob the occupants instead. They got away with less than $50 in cash and 2 jugs of whiskey. Disappointed, he went back to the hayloft and drank for the next 2 days. What Elmer didn't know was that a posse was already after him. They found him the morning of the 6th, and after a demand to come out or die, Elmer opened fire. Both parties traded shots back and forth until Elmer was fatally wounded and died. His remains were then shipped to a coroner in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where he went unclaimed. In an effort to make back the money he was losing on the unclaimed body, the coroner, a man named Joseph Johnson, heavily embalmed Elmer and stood him near his front door, charging customers who wanted to see him. Their payment was placed in Elmer's mouth. As the years changed, so did Elmer's clothes, but he was still unclaimed. Finally, in 1916, 2 men showed up saying they were his brothers and demanded his remains. Those 2 men, Charles and James Patterson, were actually from the Great Patterson Carnival shows. Elmer's body traveled with the show until 1921 when he was bought by Sonny Lewis, who owned a traveling freak show. When those attractions fell out of favor with the public, Lewis sent Elmer's body to a warehouse where he remained until 1968. Elmer was eventually sold to the Pike Amusement Park, where he was renamed the 1,000-year-old man. That was until 65 years later when he was found by the crew of the $6 Million Man. On a rainy day in April of 1977, Elmer was finally put to rest at the Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma. He was carried there in a horse-drawn, glass-enclosed hearse in a handmade pine box. When he arrived at the Boot Hill section of the cemetery, he was laid to rest alongside bandit Bill Doolin and the Wild Bunch Gang. His funeral was attended by 300 people. Most were locals. That included law enforcement and school children. Nearly all were dressed in period clothes. After years of being exhibited to people, Elmer would go to his grave in a closed casket ceremony. Minister Glenn Jordan of Norman, Oklahoma, officiated the service. He said, "We cannot condemn you because we don't know the conditions that existed in your time. We realize now that you were a part of our heritage and a part of us, and therefore, with respect and decency, we commit you to the earth." His casket was lowered into the grave and covered with cardboard and many layers of concrete before being filled with dirt. Everyone wanted to make sure this was officially Elmer's final resting place. Above his grave stands a 5-foot slab that is used as a grave marker. It says, "Elmer McCurdy, shot by sheriff's posse in Osage Hills, returned to Guthrie, Oklahoma from LA County, California for burial April 22nd, 1977. Case cracked. I would like to thank news.google.com, the New England Historical Society, NPR, and Wikipedia. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is to discuss it with us now. Christy, of all the unexpected twists in this case, I think I'm most surprised by hundreds of people turning up at the memorial service. But
yeah.
I've got one big question about that. Were any of them relatives?
There were no relatives at his funeral. And I have saw nobody come forward since then saying they're a relative either. So maybe that's one of those, family lines that just burn out.
Kind of ends. Yeah. It could, well, there could be another factor, right? Like it could be that there are family members, they are aware of it, but they just don't want to be associated to the story.
That's true. Yeah.
Which I think is kind of a weird place to come from with, like the way they handled his burial and all that kind of stuff. It seems like that was a nice, respectful thing to do. I think they probably would have stepped forward if they were around, but maybe they don't know. Maybe there's relatives that just haven't done the, ancestry.com work to figure out that they're tied to this guy or looked into his history to see, what happened to him. Such a crazy past. Well, both. I mean, his life story seems like it's really interesting as well. Did you mention there's a book about that?
Oh, yes. And I cannot remember the name of it right now.
Okay.
But yeah, there is a book. It's on Amazon and it comes up. Mark Svenhold, I believe, is the author.
Right. Okay.
So, and it looked really interesting.
Yeah, for anyone that wants to look more into the history there of Elmer McCurdy, you might want to check out that book as well. But there was another twist at the funeral. You mentioned that there was a lot of people wearing period clothes, but I haven't heard about this. Tell us about what's an 89er?
Well, I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
And the article talked about, there were a significant number of people there dressed up like that. And they stayed after the funeral and talked. So I know it has importance, but even when I researched it, all I could find really was it was a term applied specifically to persons who participated in the land run of April 22nd, 1889 into the unassigned lands. Oh, you know what I should have done? I should have emailed Catherine Pear.
Why?
She's in that state.
Oh.
I bet she knows more about that. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, Catherine, if you're watching this, do the research, plop it into a post down below, and let me know that you did that, and I'll pin it up to the top so people can take a look. Yeah, I'd never heard about that as well. 89ers.
Yeah, I don't know.
Now, some people are probably watching this video and saying, John, what is this Lee Majors guy that you're talking about? For kids of the 80s, the $6 Million Man was kind of huge. There was like toys but for younger people, you might be familiar with them from something. Christy, was he a star recently? Something?
He recently played Ash's dad on the Starz series, The Evil Dead. And I really enjoyed his appearance on that. I watch anything Bruce Campbell. And when I saw Lee Majors as his dad, I was like, what?
It was great casting. Yeah. Especially to have him be kind of a cranky,
Yeah.
doesn't really seem to enjoy his son angle. And it was good just to see Lee do anything like that because he kind of fell out for years. Like we really haven't seen him do too much in recent years in terms of popular culture. But Ash versus the Evil Dead on Starz if you want to see Lee Majors in that. Now there's one fact that you were so excited about, and this wasn't worked into the script, so here's new information. You actually had to email me about it. And it seems that the mummy of Elmer McCurdy was the inspiration for a extremely popular 80s character.
Oh, yeah. This blew my mind.
Yeah, tell them about it.
Blew my mind. So according to the Masters of the Universe episode of Netflix's The Toys That Made Us, former Mattel artist and designer Mark Taylor recounts the backstory behind the creation of Skeletor, which stemmed back to a traumatizing event at a local carnival and a certain haunted house decoration. Years later, Taylor learned that his encounter at the Pike Amusement Park was terrifying for a good reason. I knew that was a real person, he explained. Over 60 years later, I'm watching the Discovery Channel. It turns out he was a real guy and he was really at the Long Beach Pike. So yeah, Elmer McCurdy terrified him as a child and we got Skeletor out of that.
That's pretty amazing. And as a matter of fact, in my early YouTube days, I actually used Skeletor as a character in a couple of videos. And those videos, you can't find them. Don't go looking for them. But because you guys are here right now, here's a picture so that you can see what it looked like. Lord and Arts Skeletor style. All right. That is it for this. Thank you so much, Christy. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Hillary Green, Brandy Fry, and James Reed. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Candace Glazier recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord Nart story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to hit that bell icon below if you'd like to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new Unsolved Mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord Narts channel.